turn over the conversation to Dr. Wessels and Caroline Charles.
All right. Thanks, Michael. Hi, everyone. Welcome. We're excited you're here. I'm excited to talk to Caroline and learn a little bit more about your work. Okay, so before I ask you to kind of like introduce your project a little bit more, I actually want to hear your origin story in terms of how you came to this project. So like, what's the origin story that like explains how you kind of came to these archival practices in Black filmmakers?
That's a really good question. I've always been really interested in Black representations in media, not just in film. In my undergraduate career, I was really interested in comic books, actually, and I wrote about representations of African American superheroes. So I really was wanting to understand what it meant for there to be like Black images overall. One of my biggest inspirations for this project has been a film called Through a Lens Darkly, which is also a part of my dissertation. The full title is Through a Lens Darkly, Black Photographers and the Emergence of a People. And this is a film that I wrote about in Roger House's class, who's here, on photographs. And that film really got me to start thinking about what it means for there to be Black image archives and to have Black archivists like Deborah Willis, who is a big feature and co-collaborator on that film, which is directed by Thomas Allen Harris. And I really think that it was that film and writing about it that got me to think about what Black archival practice in film means.
Oh, I love that. I love that actually it kind of connects to like other forms of media too, like comic books and things like that. That's really interesting. And see, I love the origin story even works for maybe it starts with comic books or graphic novels, depending on how we want to talk about it. Okay, so tell us maybe a little bit more about the project itself. Do you want to spend a few minutes just introducing what your research is all about and kind of where you've taken this interest in Through a Lens Darkly?
Sure, yeah, and I can just share a little bit here. I'll share my screen. So the idea of Black archival practice, and hopefully everyone can see here, is something that in doing this research and also some of the projects that I have done outside of my dissertation, which I can talk about, is something that has existed within Black communities, Black cultural workers for a long time. But more recently, Black archival practice is something that Black archivists in archival studies have tried to center as a way to kind of disrupt how we interact with archives and how archivists think about archives. So it's a particular relationship to evidence, how Black people go about documenting, but also intervening in historical narrative. And I was really intrigued by this idea and thought a lot about how Black archival practice could be enacted with or through film. And so how is it that films can also hold on to cultural memory or can also be a community practice? So in my project, the dissertation itself, I have kind of a broad array of films that I think are interested or enacting a kind of Black archival practice, interested in thinking through what it means for there to be gaps in historical memory, or how we approach historical memory through narrative. And the chapters are kind of organized around different kinds of strategies. So reappropriation being one, fabulation being another within queer cinema. I'm also really interested in films that deal with enslavement and the sort of lack of visual evidence of slavery within archives. So how do we deal with that through cinema? And my last chapter talks a lot about Through a Lens Darkly, that film that is part of my origin story, and how that film is really embedded in a community-based archival practice. So that's a very general overview of the dissertation project, but I'm happy to answer more questions as well.
Yeah. Well, there's so much there. I feel like I could like ask you to walk us through every single chapter, because just reading your overview, I was so excited to read more of this when it's all put together. But I want to come back to the community element, because I do think your work in the archives and your work with the photography project is super interesting. But before we get there, I want to talk a little bit more about, or tell us a little bit more about kind of the fiction films that you chose to work with, or the narrative films that you chose to work with, because I thought that was kind of an interesting part of your project that I'd love for you to just tell us a little bit more about.
Yeah, so one thing that in putting together the my perspectives in my dissertation, a lot of the films at first that I found myself interested in were documentaries or more experimental films, because I was at first thinking about how films sort of reappropriate archival material and how they get used within films. But then I thought, well, is it possible for there to be a kind of archival practice that doesn't necessarily reappropriate, but uses narrative to think through similar questions about history? And it's like, probably. So that's a question that I have, especially when it comes to films about enslavement, because there is not a lot of actual visual evidence, particularly from enslaved people. So how is it possible for films to kind of ask questions about what that history was? Is it possible for narrative films in particular to do that, to get us to think through those gaps? So yeah, I wanted the dissertation to really be about a range of film modes and genres. So I think the narrative, figuring out how narrative films fit into that is something that I have to think more about as I write, but it's really interesting to me.
Yeah. I mean, I just love the range of films when I was reading through this, from Spike Lee to Steve McQueen. That's a range. One of the things that you also, I'm circling my way back to kind of your archival work, but you talked a little bit about, Isaac Julian having like an accompanying exhibit. And so I'm curious, like not just, fiction documentary, but also kind of these extra textual elements that accompany the films. And how do you see your research dealing with those extra textual dimensions of like exhibits and, the projects that you've been working on?
Yeah. So part of what I think is so interesting about my second chapter, which deals with this idea of fabulation within Black queer cinema, fabulation being the sort of making up of archival material, using film to think through some of the gaps that exist within Black queer archives. And that chapter is focused on how that fabulation, right, in a film like The Watermelon Woman, creating Faye Richards as a fictional queer actress that never existed, but can exist in these archival photographs, or photographs that we perceive as archival, right? And I'm interested in how those films are both films, Isaac Julian's Looking for Langston and The Watermelon Woman, whose materials can exist outside of the film space in exhibitions. And as someone who has had, I think, the privilege to curate my own exhibition with The Love Supreme, I really wanted to think through what it means for film to kind of be able to exist in, as film, but also within the art space, and how it is that film can kind of create that possibility to live on beyond just the film itself.
Yeah. Well, you've led us back to A Love Supreme, the exhibition that you co-curated. And why don't you introduce that to everyone? And then I'm really curious about how working on this exhibition kind of shaped your methodology when you thought about the research project on the archives.
Yeah, and I'll bring up some more images just so that everyone has a reference. So when I started writing the first chapter of my dissertation after I defended my perspectives, it occurred to me that maybe I'd want to get some more experience within an archive. So I sought out a position within the Special Collections Research Center at Syracuse University Libraries. And maybe it was serendipitous, I don't know, but they were looking for people to curate an exhibition on their materials related to the Black Arts Movement, because SCRC happens to have a pretty substantial amount of chapbooks and journal publications from the time that were produced by Black presses. And I somehow was able to be a part of that. And I met Jessica Terry Elliott as a result. And we spent months, probably it took us about 6 months to put together the exhibition. But we spent months really looking through all of the materials that exist related to this time period in the Black Arts Movement in SCRC. Spent time thinking about how to present that information. So much of it that really hadn't been pulled out from the collections, only occasionally. So we were thinking about, how do we tell the story of this time period and the movement while also getting people to sort of see the value of those materials and them in SCRC. One of the things that doing that work really taught me in some ways is the value of collaboration in I think with all kinds of academic projects, but particularly with archival practice as well. And Jessica is also really interested in archives, and archives are a central part of her public history work. So being able to talk with her about the importance of doing this Black archival work was, and doing that work every day I think allowed me to learn a lot about what it means to produce things through collaboration.
Yeah. I love that. And I'm looking at these photos and I sort of want to be like, okay, now walk us through. But there is, in fact, a video tour available. Maybe someone can put that
Yes.
link in the chat if you want to actually see this. But maybe could you tell us a little bit more about kind of like so you spend, 6 months looking through the archives
Mhm.
and really sifting through the materials related to the Black Arts movement. Could you tell us kind of what the story that you and Jessica sort of settled on for this
Mhm.
exhibit, like how you sort of came to what kind of story were you two decided to tell with it?
Yeah, so I think that the at the heart of it really was a love supreme, right, which is refers to Coltrane's four-part piece and album, right? But we also wanted love to be the central theme of how we wanted to think about that time period, right? So each part of the exhibition in some ways illuminates the the I don't know, that love that was at the center of, wanting to um really cultivate a black political expression during the time period. Right. And one of the I don't have a picture of this particular part of the exhibit, but one of the sections we titled In Eternal Love, and we dedicated to family photo walls and family photography, which is obviously something I'm really interested in. But we wanted our intervention, I guess, to say, everything that was produced in this time period was done so out of a love for Black people and Black culture.
Love that. And I feel like we've talked about, sort of the power of collaboration, the importance of love to this. And maybe we can use that to transition to kind of a really key part of both your research project and your sort of your praxis, right? Which is the community project that comes out of Through a Lens Darkly, the public facing project about family photos. And I think you have a slide for that. So maybe I'll
Yes,
let you
I do.
introduce that project a little bit more. It's so cool.
Yeah, so this has been a lot of fun, and it really has, developed from both my dissertation work and the work that I've done with A Love Supreme, particularly because I am still working like very closely with Jessica on this project, so it seemed kind of natural that we both start this and work alongside Roger, as well as our two source undergraduate assistants who are Anaya Jones and Surya Rahim. And this project really thinks about how our everyday history in Syracuse can be told through family photographs, and how the family photograph itself might be an entry point to seeing histories that have gone kind of unseen within Syracuse. And the great thing about our group, Jessica and I are both originally from Syracuse, and as well as our two undergraduate assistants. And there is so much, even growing up in the city, that we don't learn about our history, don't learn about what urban renewal did to our city in school. And one of the things that we wanted to do, especially in our October event, is honor the history of the 15th Ward in Syracuse, which was a primarily, before urban renewal, was a primarily Black and Jewish neighborhood that where people ended up getting displaced when 81 came through. So one of the great things about doing that event at the Everson Museum was that the Everson sits in that space of the 15th ward. So it was kind of a way to honor the place that we were in, but also, get the museum to honor that space. So we invited people to come. We collaborated with Thomas Allen Harris on this. We invited people to come share stories through their family photographs. We even had participants who had pictures from the 15th ward. And it's just been a really great process, because one of the things that both the Family Pictures Institute and with what we're doing thinks about with photo sharing is its ability not only to illuminate history, but also to connect us with each other. Family photos have a way of doing that, but we don't always, right? We don't, they're usually private images, right? So there's something about being able to share family photos with others that allows us to kind of connect at a deeper level, especially within, the communities we're a part of and inhabit. So yeah, it's been a great project to work on.
Yeah, one of my questions for you was going to be like, so as someone from Syracuse, what's something you learned through this project that you didn't know about your home before it? And you've sort of answered that, but is there something you want to add to that about like something that you learned about Syracuse you didn't know?
Yeah, that's a good question. I think there's not something in particular that I can think of right now, but it's just been great we've started to talk to elders in our community about their family photographs. And I think it's just really showed me just how much you can learn from the people that are practically next door to you. Because there's someone that we've been talking with who I've probably walked past their house for years now because they're a neighbor. And just having the chance to sit down with someone who has lived in the community for over like 80 years, telling you about, something that they think, is not necessarily like historical, but it relates to them. But I also see as, another way to learn about the place that I've lived my whole life. I really started to see, the value in talking to people who are, who are much older than you about their lives, right? So I think more so than learning a very specific thing about Syracuse, I've learned that, there's a lot of value in talking to your neighbors, the people that live around you.
Yeah, that makes sense. That's a valuable takeaway for sure. And I think one of the things that interested me when we talked about this project before and sort of, the connection between your community work, the archival work, and then of course your like scholarly research work is the way that kind of collapses a lot of these distinctions, right? You're interested in like collapsing, archival documentary and fiction and looking at how those works are at play. And we talked a little bit, and I'd love to hear a little bit more about how this community element, this work that you've done out in the community has come back to inform sort of your scholarly practice.
Yeah. And I think that's one thing that I've continued to think about with this idea of Black archival practice in film. Right? Like how, my biggest question being like, how can film itself be a methodology for doing all these things that Black archival practice tries to do? So how can film be something that we do in different ways? And also, how can my scholarship be something that that I do that, kind of goes beyond just the writing part and the thinking part. Like how can I, as someone who's lived in Syracuse and is a part of the Syracuse University community as well as the city's community, how can I kind of bridge that gap together? I think I, again, have seen the value in collaboration. And it's shown me to also look for that within the films that I study too. So I hope that answers the question, but I can say more.
No, I mean, I think I've just been really drawn to this like community engaged aspect of your work and kind of the exchange between, again, the scholarly research that maybe you're doing individually head down at your computer, versus kind of being out in the community, actually talking to people and, getting photographs taken and assembling these exhibits. Like, I think that's a really beautiful, holistic way to think about this project. So, being mindful of our time here, one thing I do want to make sure I ask you about is like kind of like what's the next thing you're really excited about? So this is an ongoing project, right? You're still working on it. So what are you like most excited about that's coming up next, or that you're going to tackle next, or that you're going to extend and keep working on next?
Yeah, that's a good question. I think, well, I'm excited about doing more of these interviews for our Family Pictures project, and eventually being able to. So the goal eventually is to have some kind of digital archive that people in Syracuse can access. And it's going to take a lot of work to build that infrastructure. But with the ways that we've been able to kind of use this archive within like community workshops and in all the things that we've been doing, can kind of envision it in my head as being something that'll be very valuable to the people in our community. So I'm looking forward to that when we're able to finally complete that in some ways.
Yeah.
Or realize that.
Definitely. And just like with what you've studied so far, or what you've kind of come across so far in that work, how do you see the family photographs specifically kind of telling a different story about a community than, say, the sort of more official archival documents you might be familiar with, or like the more official ways of keeping histories? Like what do the family photographs specifically kind of add to that community story?
It's funny because I was actually talking about, I don't know if any of my students are here, but we were talking about family photographs today. And that's a question that I asked them in our class, because I'm teaching a lot of the things that I'm writing about. And one of the things that I think family pictures can do is really not only tell a more sort of honed in specific story, but with the photographs that we use in everyday life, right? Photographs are tactile. They are, we display them on walls. There are stories behind them. There are ways that we use them. There's a way that in narrating those stories, we are really expressing and connecting, again, on a deeper level, a more human level. So there's something about being able to communicate a history, I guess, from below, that again allows us that kind of deeper connection to each other. And if history, it isn't showing us, history as we know it can't show us everything about a specific place, right? But again, there's just something about being able to narrate those stories through something that's so personal to us that I think allows us to understand our connections to each other very differently.
Well, thank you both for this conversation. I'm looking at the clock and I want to make sure we have some time to field questions from the audience. So at this point, I'd invite everyone listening in to raise your hand to let us know if you have a question, and we'll proceed from there.
I know, I'm sorry, I snuck in one last question because I was like, I really wanted to get that answered.
Yeah, Andrew, and then Barbara.
Thank you both for a really wonderful conversation. I have a question, Caroline, about the relationship between film and photography, and how you think about medium specificity or intermedial relations, because you switch between these areas so effortlessly and so brilliantly. I wonder if you see them as simply related expressions of a broader visual culture, or whether you engage medium specificity and see some distinct properties in terms of whether it's in the technology, the form, the cultural practices of archival work.
Yeah, that's a really good question. And I guess within my project, I think a lot about Jamie Barron's perception of the archive effect, and how archives themselves are not necessarily just the objects of history, but are a sort of spectatorial relationship to images in history, right? So in that way, I think that particular idea of spectatorship kind of blurs the lines a bit. But at the same time, I think a lot about a film like Through a Lens Darkly, right, which is about photography, but is able to tell that story through film and chooses to tell that story through film. Yeah, I don't know. I think that might be something that I have to think a little bit more about as far as distinctions between both. But I think I'm focused on how a medium like film gets us to think about different kinds of archival objects. So yeah, I'm not sure how to answer.
Well, thank you so much.
Barbara?
Yeah, I want to ask about the more practical aspect of having these public-facing community projects and writing a dissertation. So what advice you would give to graduate students or advisors who are thinking about a dissertation on public-facing projects and are concerned about the time commitment? And then I wanted to ask you why you decided. I understand how the projects are related theoretically and how they inform each other, but why you decided to keep the dissertation sort of contained and separate and not to have like the digital photography or the exhibition be formally part of the dissertation that some universities now allow. So for example, I had a graduate student who wrote about films made of filmic archival material, and then she created her own archival film, and that was part of the dissertation. So what would you tell graduate students? Would you advise them? What would you tell us as advisors? What do graduate students who do that kind of work need?
That's a really good question. I think to answer the second part of what you said, as far as keeping them separate, the Turning the Lens Collective and what we did with the Family Pictures Syracuse project, that is something that I am writing about in my 4th chapter, because the film Through a Lens Darkly, we actually screened that film as a part of our launch events for the project. And that chapter is interested in how that film gets used kind of as a way to demonstrate photo sharing. So in some ways, the project is tied to the dissertation. Although A Love Supreme, I'm sure A Love Supreme will be mentioned somewhere, but that, I guess that was a kind of extra thing that I did on top of the dissertation, right? But I still see what I'm doing, the kind of like practice and methodology as part of the work. As far as advice in time, I don't know if I have great advice, other than just, I don't know. As far as I might come back to that, but like advising, right? I think that and Roger's here, who's my advisor, not to single you out, but I think that having that kind of support and faith that those community projects are actual dissertation work, and not something that is unrelated to the work, and having someone that is supportive in that way has been like amazing, because I can imagine another scenario where someone didn't support that and saw it as kind of something that was not relevant to writing. But I've found that doing this work has helped me in the writing process in a lot of ways, and thinking through my arguments a lot more, right? So just being someone who's willing to support, I don't know if that's enough advice, but that's what I would say.
Robin?
Hey, Caroline, if you'd be willing to share some of the thinkers or theorists that are most helpful for you, that'd be really interesting to me in terms of like the kind of work that you're talking about. I'm only really familiar with Saidiya Hartman's kind of stuff on counter history, but that's way old, and I'm guessing the field has come a long way since then. So if you could fill me in, I'd be grateful.
So actually, Saidiya Hartmann is someone that I talk about a lot, and was also very inspirational to this work. So Saidiya Hartmann, as far as Black archival practice, there's actually a journal, The Black Scholar, that did an entire issue on Black archival practice, and Zakiya Collier and Tonya Sutherland have been sort of central to that side of things. On the film side of things, talked a bit about Jamie Barron being kind of a key interlocutor. And I'm also interested in Black film scholars who are looking at longer histories of African Americans using film to kind of negotiate their representation. So Anna Everett, Jacqueline Stewart, and Allison Nadia Field have been kind of central to that work as well.
We've got time for at least one more question here, if not two. Ramita?
Hi, Caroline. Nice to see you. And
Hi.
I was hiding because I was eating my dinner. But this was a wonderful conversation. And having seen your work evolve now over the past year and a half, and seen the exhibition that you curated in special collections, I have a visual question for you, along lines, I think, of what Andrew Utterson was asking. And as a visual historian, I'm very curious how you responded, especially to the pictures or the photographs that you worked with in the community-driven project at the Everson Museum of Art. Because sometimes we treat storytelling that people remember as memories in their heads as reflective or as direct reflections of the images. Whereas in fact, oftentimes they're on very different tracks.
Yeah.
There are departures, there are disruptions. And I wondered if you, in the course of your work with those photographs, found those departures as well as perhaps disjunctures, right, between what people remembered and what the images held. And second of all, you brought up, of course, the famous location or infamous location of the Everson Museum of Art. I wondered also through the images if you found certain visual threads emerging about Syracuse and how people photograph themselves, let's say in the 1980s versus how they're choosing to photograph themselves now. Because these temporal shifts are very crucial, not only in terms of technology, but, social media has changed everything.
Yeah.
While camera has changed everything, right? So this is a very large question. Take what you wish from it, and you can answer one or two of the threads that I've sent your way right now.
Yeah, that's a good question, and I think that both of your questions, and I think as far as like disruptions and departures, kind of interpreting images is something that we've thought about in how we interview people about their photographs. So recently we've been talking with an elder in the community who has so many family photographs, so many wonderful family photographs, and his roots in Syracuse go back at least to the early 20th century, maybe even further. But one of the, I think, wonderful things about the first conversation that we had with him is that his daughter was present for the conversation, right? So if there was something that he said, and there was never anything that we necessarily took as, that we took as like wrong or incorrect, but it was interesting to have another voice there to also be able to speak to a different perspective on a family photograph, right? So one of the things that I think we have to think about in doing some of these interviews is, if we're talking about a family photograph, one family photograph, do we have one person kind of narrating that history? Or is it possible to have a family kind of talk about the different ways that they understand or perceive that photograph? And I think that that's one of the reasons why we do the interviews and don't just, take the photographs. There's something about people narrating the stories, especially while holding the photographs, that gets you to think about narrative, how people construct narrative, how people understand their relationships to their family photographs. Yeah.
So this is reminding me, if I may follow up,
Yeah.
what you're getting at is also this word construction, because ultimately film is also a visual construction. So is a photograph, right? So I guess what I'm curious about is, to what extent are you seeing these as visual constructions, and memory being very fragile, right? So somebody may not remember something, but the photograph makes them think they remember something, and that memory, in fact, may be constructed depending on that particular moment in which you're interviewing that person. And the same thing also with a film. It's ultimately constructing a memory, or it's embedded in the memories of others, perhaps, but at the same time, it has a visual life of its own. So anyways, just responding to what you said with the fragility of memory, I think it'd be interesting to continue this conversation when I see you next in Syracuse.
Yes, yes.
Thank you.
Unless there are any last questions as we're wrapping up here? Well, then in our final minutes, I'd like to invite.
I think Leah had a hand up.
Oh, I'm sorry, Leah.
I'm sorry, I didn't use my digital hand. I just wanted to ask quickly about your own experience, maybe as a photographer. Were you taking family photos as a kid? Did you have a Polaroid or a digital camera? I mean, what is your like on the ground experience of recording a sort of family history yourself?
Thank you for that question. I actually, when I was much younger, before I went to school, the favorite gift that I ever got from my parents was a digital Canon camera. So when I was younger, I did take a lot of pictures of my family. I grew up going to the Community Folk Art Center, which is one of the places that A Love Supreme was exhibited. But going to the Community Folk Art Center and doing summer photography camps. So I actually have a ton of images from when I take home cameras and take pictures of my family. The one thing that I love to do more than anything is take pictures of my younger brother, because he's so photogenic. So I like to think of myself as the person who's documenting his life in a lot of ways. And yeah, I think that's one of the reasons why I'm really attracted to this project and the idea of family photography. And my family, of course, is big on photographs. We have family photos all over our house. So reading about, I think, going back to the origin story, right? Seeing through a lens darkly, and reading about the importance of family photographs in just like Black life in general, and being able to see that sort of reflected in my own experience, in my own home, I think was really inspiring me to get into this work.
Well, all right then. We have about 6 minutes left here before we end, and I'd just like to invite everyone to share any takeaways they have, things that stood out in our conversation, something that was an idea that really sparked an interest of yours. I would start just by saying I'm really looking forward to seeing the new project you're working on, the family pictures, as someone who is not familiar with Syracuse, except perhaps from 81 as I drive through it, thinking about what has happened to the 15th Ward and the kind of work that you're doing and how that will impact sort of making visible something that has been really literally destroyed. To me is just something really fascinating. It shows the power of this kind of research. Other thoughts that people want to share based on what we've heard tonight? Barbara?
I can just share that I found your response to my question really helpful and inspiring and motivating to advise graduate students, and that maybe we sometimes overthink issues, and that it seems that you gained a lot of energy from the community engagement. And so just sort of being open and supportive, I think, is really helpful advice to me as an advisor. So I appreciated that.
Roger?
I just want to second Barbara's comment in the I think the kind of project that Caroline is doing, in which integrates community engagement with archival research and more traditional sort of hermeneutic close analysis of films within film studies, is a model for PhD programs in the humanities, and that we need to, those of us in PhD programs really need to rethink the structure, the dynamics of research and dissertation writing, and what dissertations look like, if we are to truly serve our graduate students in the evolving job market. So.
Ariana?
Hi. I just wanted to say that I really appreciated hearing more about your project, Caroline. And I also really liked how you talked about like understanding that community work is dissertation work. And I think it's really cool the way that this allows us to kind of break down the barriers that have prevented like Black communities from taking part in academic spaces, especially when we are kind of in these spaces theorizing and talking about them, you know? And so I just really valued and appreciated that. And I like that in many ways you are creating like this tension in this field about how we are looking at film and like what it can do, and what it can do with like photographs, especially when we are redirecting the gaze and giving it back to someone who is usually the subject of viewership, and now being able to reclaim that narrative. So great job.
Any other thoughts? Belisa?
I just really like the reminder to, well, first of all, Caroline, that was fantastic. I'm so excited to hear more about your work. And I just love the reminder to talk to the people in your neighborhood, you know, and how much wisdom sits with people. So I appreciate that.
Well, all right. Well, I'd like to ask everyone in our last 30 seconds here to unmute so we could give a nice round of applause to Caroline Charles and Dr. Wessels. Okay, well, thanks to you both. Thanks to all of you for coming. The formal part of our event is at an end, but if you stick around, as I mentioned at the beginning, for the next 15 minutes, we'll have a Connections and Locations, which is more of a social opportunity for us to talk with each other. Thank you all for coming, and I hope you do stick around to chat.
Thank you, everyone.
So we can just wait another 20 seconds or so while folks disappear. But to begin Conversations and Locations, we really ask folks to share with us where they're at, right? So if we could just sort of go around the Zoom and have folks tell us where they're located so we can feel a little bit more embodied with each other. That's the way we like to begin our event. So we can sort of, as the kids say, popcorn it. So I can start out by calling on one person, and then they could ask another person to speak. And so I'll start with Matt, if you want to tell us where you're coming from this evening.
I've never heard popcorn it before. Is that
really? Yeah, my students always say I'm going to popcorn it to someone else, even though I'm not totally sure. I tried to get past the point to work as a alternate version of popcorn, but no one ever picked up on it. So.
I kind of like popcorn. Hi, everybody. Matt Holtmeyer. I'm at East Tennessee State University, so that's in East Tennessee.
So, Matt, if you want to popcorn it.
Oh, I was a bad person to start with. I need an example. Well, I'll popcorn it over to Lauren because the popcorn should fly somewhere strange, right? It can't go in a straight row.
Hi, I'm Lauren Berliner. I'm in Seattle, Washington, and I am familiar with the term popcorn and use it. I will pass it to Andrew.
And I just renamed on Zoom, so you might now see that I'm actually not a man of mystery, but Andrew Utterson from Ithaca College, which means we're awfully lucky to have Caroline with us for this year as a pre-doctoral fellow. So really thrilled for that and to be here this evening. And I'll popcorn to Roger.
And I'd never heard of popcorn either. I love it. I love the notion of like it's flying out of the bucket. So I'm Roger Haas, and I'm in the English department here at Syracuse, and a longtime fan of conversations across screen cultures.
Yeah, Roger was one of our very first featured guests.
And I'm going to popcorn it to Barbara.
Hi, I'm Barbara Menon. I'm at the University of Florida, and I think I was the last conversationalist, and so I'm trying to be supportive of your future guests and make this part of an ongoing conversation. And I popcorn it to Anastasia, if she's there. If not, I think it might have to be Chelsea.
All right. I also have not heard popcorn, but I'm into it. I'm in East Tennessee, but more specifically Johnson City, just because East Tennessee is a big place, I think. Matt, you're not being specific enough. So Johnson City, Tennessee. Yes, everyone should now have wagon wheel running through their heads. If you've been to Johnson City, truly, it's everywhere. So are we doing everyone I guess I'll popcorn over to Michael.
Hi, folks. I'm Mike Richardson. I'm at Ithaca College. I have the good fortune of being the director of the Screen Cultures program, which means that I've gotten to know Caroline through her work and through her teaching this year. And I'm looking to see if there's anyone that hasn't spoken yet. Well, Caroline, I guess, but we all know who Caroline is, unless Anastasia is here with us.
So this is our chance to just chat about whatever we want and just to socialize. But I was really found it compelling. And I want to say that I've been thinking a lot. My mom has all of the family albums from like her parents and from, I think she's got like 18 different albums from my childhood and my sister's childhood. And they're all out on the back porch upstairs. And she wants to get rid of them so she can have that space. And I keep saying, don't get rid of them. And I keep thinking about how like valuable it is to have photos on paper and how I feel like I'm just going to lose the like 44,000 photos or whatever that I have on my phone. I mean, at some point, something's going to happen, right? And they're just going to be gone. But these photos that my mom has from like the family trip to Cuba in 1938 or whatever, like those we still are going to have on this beautiful, like sealed in plastic album that is going to stay forever. And well, longer anyway. So I'm just wondering if folks have like reflections on the like really compelling issue of history and family photography, and the way that it relates to communities, that Caroline was talking about. It just seems so vital.
I think that's
I
a
want to
great
give
point.
it. Oh,
I'm sorry. I mean,
go,
like
Mike.
you, I only have, the last 15 years, I only have really digital photos. I've printed out very few of them. And I started probably a couple of years ago, I started to get very paranoid and kept backing them up to various computers just in case I lost my phone. But it's definitely a far cry from growing up and flipping through picture books, and the tactile sensation of it, of sorting through photos is really something that we don't have anymore. And I don't, I'm never going to print out the 5,000 photos of my son sleeping that I have. But I wonder if I would have made different choices if I thought of them as we used to, which is I've only got 24 photos on this roll, so I better make these count. It's definitely has changed my relationship to it, and it's a good pastime for me when I do visit my parents to dig out those photo albums and flip through them.
I also want to say I was really struck by Carolyn's story of having the people talk about the photos. And obviously, I'm not there, but it seemed to me that. So I'm wondering what's the difference between so the way I imagined when you said it was that they sit there and they hold the photo, and then the photo sort of initiates a process of memory, which I imagine is different than when we sit there with the phone and we know there's another one coming. So we're actually sort of shortening our narrative because we know there's already this implied sequence in the digital. And so I wonder whether maybe you want to say a little bit more about this sort of telling and the relationship of the telling to the photo, and whether that's different than what we do now with the digital, or whether I'm just sort of imagining that.
Yeah, that's so interesting. Because again, I was talking about this with my students today, trying to teach them or think about different meanings of like vernacular photography. And one of the things that they were, I don't know, that almost scared me a little bit, but they were interested in thinking more about is how few like physical photos they interact with on a daily basis. They were trying to tell me, oh, well, we don't have like, or it's been so long since I've seen like a physical photo. So they were really wanting to think about the differences between how we interact with like digital family photos, and how we use social media, versus just interacting with photos. And it made me have to think a little bit more about if we in this process, if people have digital photos, and people have come with photos on their phone, right? We don't just have require that people bring physical physical photos. But a lot of what we've done has been to encourage people to kind of preserve the photographs, the physical photographs that they have. And maybe one thing that we can do is also encourage people to actually start to print out photographs, because I also worry about losing these huge digital collections that we have. I think I have 20,000 photographs on my phone that are just sitting on a cloud, and I realize how easily those could disappear.
And just to follow up on Caroline's point, one of the things that the project is also involving not just the undergraduate research assistants, which we have through the source, which is our undergraduate research office. I'm also teaching an engaged humanities course around vernacular photography and social justice, and having the undergraduate students in that class will be doing some of the individual interviews with community elders. And one of the things that we've been working, their first assignment was the students themselves had to find a family photograph that they're willing to write about. But before we got to the writing stage, I had them do several interviews with one another to get some practice on how you engage with soliciting the stories behind them without necessarily imposing or directing or finding the things that you find interesting about but also keeping open a space for engagement. So the interview becomes this space of engagement, but one that's also embedded within the intercultural encounter, but also involves intercultural competencies around not making assumptions about the photographs that you're seeing. So one of the things that I think we're learning is sort of we were inspired by the Family Pictures model that Thomas Allen Harris had developed through the Family Pictures Institute for Inclusive Storytelling. And one of the things that he often talks about is he's more interested in the encounter than the act of collecting, right? He always says, his project is not about collecting. Well, ours is about collecting, and that sort of shifts and changes the dynamics, although it's collecting in a digital format, because we also believe that preservation of vernacular photography, the ultimate place for family photograph to be preserved not just in its physical state, but also the value and social meaning it has for the people who have used that family photograph, is the family itself. And so we're creating a digital archive where the material object and all the affective value and meaning that it has stays within the family. But the scanned photograph and the interview around that is something that can then be a living archive, that it can be used in public art projects, educational curricula, and in whatever way the communities that produce it want to use it.
Thanks, Roger. I hadn't heard of the Family Pictures Institute for Inclusive Storytelling, so that's really, I just looked it up. It's, I appreciate having that brought to our attention. We don't like to keep people too late in connections and locations, but if folks have a concluding thought or want to say anything, I obviously would love to just thank both Chelsea and Caroline and Mike for running such a fantastic event. But I'll turn the floor over.
Well, I just have one last comment, which is in these piggybacking off of the Barbara and what Roger has said, which is I wonder, Caroline, you talked about having people talk about photos, and the photo is a prompt for memory. I kind of wonder, as an experiment, what it would be like to have people, before they looked at the photo, sort of recount their memory of a particular event or moment in time, and then bring out the photo and see if that changes the narrative there. That is to say, if their memory is different without the visual prompt, than it is when they see the visual prompt and then begin talking about it. I mean, it sounded like from what you had gathered, if I'm not mistaken, that there were when you had two people in a family looking at a picture, there were sometimes different recollections that were prompted by the same photo.
Yeah, I think that would be an interesting thing to try out. But I think also in some of the conversations, even conversations that we've had recently with the same older gentleman that I was talking about with his daughter, in those conversations, he's very talkative and knows a lot about Syracuse history. He was able to recount these stories for us, and I think we talked with him for an hour before he even pulled out a photograph. We were talking about this the other day. So it is. So I do wonder, like, how, as we do more of these interviews, how different people will encounter the storytelling through using those images, right? Because he was someone that could tell us everything and then say, "Oh, I have a photo that kind of will help you visualize this a little bit more." But there might be other people that the photograph is the main prompt. But the photograph really allows there to be a reference for the interviewer as well, to sort of prompt questions and spark conversation. So it's not only about the memory of the person who's being interviewed, but it really is a prompt for a conversation too.
And just to add to that, the one of the things we're realizing is that there, like, on the one level, on the practical level, we're trying to build protocols for how to do these interviews. But every interview and every conversation you have, if it's a genuine, encounter and a conversation, has its own dynamic, its own sort of idiosyncrasies. And so I think that's something that we're kind of grappling with to sort of, so that you honor the way that people engage with their photographs and the way they tell their stories. But you also, on our visits, we originally thought we were just going to do one visit. And then we were like, no, you need to do the first visit, which is to build trust, get to know the participants, help select some of the photographs. We thought we could do the scanning in that first visit, and then do the recorded interview on camera and the portraits in the second visit. And it's sort of, we're learning as we go, and it's a really interesting space to be, but it's also the challenge of honoring the integrity of the encounter, as well as being able to get the project, being able to sort of get the project done. And also working with a variety, working with undergraduate students, who are interested but don't have some of the technical skills that some of the faculty have, but also faculty like myself who don't have the technical skills. So it's been a fantastic and continues to be a fantastic and enriching experience.
Well, I want to thank everyone for staying after to chat more with us all. It's so great to see everyone who's here in the Zoom right now. And I will look forward to seeing many of you at our next event, April 4th, when Lauren and Jamie will be flipping the script, where last time Jamie interviewed Lauren, and this time Lauren will interview Jamie. So hope to see you all soon.
Quick question, Leah. Are you looking for new recruits for
Always.
conversations?
Always.
Okay.
So please get in touch. Yeah.
Okay, awesome.
Yeah.
Take care.
Night, everyone.
See you, everyone.
Thank you.
I'm so sad mine doesn't wave automatically. I just really I want that feature. I was like, come on. No. No dice.
Hmm.
Well, I
So-
spared you all, but I just want, Caroline, while we were talking, I found some of my family photographs, but of course they are of my dogs, not
I
my
love it.
family. But I was like, I have printed out like old, like, look at those dogs.
I love that.
And I was like, yeah, no, I have no family photographs near me, but the family photographs in my house are actually the people who owned Matt and I's house in the 1930s,
Oh.
40s, and 50s. They left us a photograph.
Oh, awesome.
Got it from, it was like their home forever. So I have a picture of them on my mantle. No big
That's
deal.
so funny.
That's
Not of my own
cool.
grandparents, but somebody else's. Anyways, that's all.
So just we're always trying to make the event better and hear how it was for you. So Caroline, tell us how did it go for you? How do you feel it went? Are there things that we could have done to make it easier or more accommodating for you? Just please let us know. How did it go for you?
I think it was fine. I just hope that I did okay. I really loved your questions, Chelsea. So thank you. Yeah, I thought it was smooth overall. So I don't have any critiques or anything. I liked how it went.
I think it's a testament to how great your work is and how interesting your project is, Caroline, that we had like a 20-minute conversation afterwards, and I feel like Leah had to kick people out. That's not usual. So I think people are really excited about your work and the ideas that it spurred. So I think you did excellent.
Thank you.
Yeah, and I should apologize. We talked about, we're going to wait. We're going to let people come in. And I gave it like 10 seconds and the silence got and I'm like, I'm getting started. And then I hear the ping, 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 ping of people joining. And I was like, I really should have let it go. But somehow I've trained myself a little bit better in class